All right, I think we are. I think we're live out there. So, hey everybody, welcome to Motion Design Hotline. I'm your host, Evan Abrams. You might know from this channel, and I'm here joined as usually with Kyle Hamrick. He's an instructor. He's a motion designer. He's a beard grower, and yeah, that's thanks for joining us again, Kyle.
I'm happy to be back. I had a great time at Blend last week, but I was sad to have to miss this. It's sort of an honor to be replaced by somebody like Ian. I've learned a ton from him, so I feel very,
That's true. Here on Motion Design Hotline, we only replace you with people, above you.
vastly superior to me, right?
That's right. We can only get a slight upgrade from before. But yeah, Ian was great. It was great having him on the show. He had a lot of great insights. We went into a lot of business thoughts towards the end when we ran long. That was an interesting time. But here on Motion Design Hotline, we take your motion design and After Effects questions. You give them to us in the chat, and then we try to solve them. We try to solve them here on air. And this program is graciously brought to us by Millonov. Millonov is a pre-production suite of tools. They're a great company who they make a web application that allows you to make some mood boards, lets you make a lot of visual scripts, lets you share ideas and collaborate, and we use it to organize the show. So if you're asking questions, then I'm going to be taking those, putting them in the Millonov, and we'll get to them. Don't worry, we'll get to them. We got a system, and our system is so robust so that we are able to deal with questions we did not get in a previous episode, which is how we kick off the show. So we're gonna kick it off here with a question we got. This was from Robinson, and there's also a series of I think Japanese kanji at the start of their name. So they're asking how to turn a triangle into a circle or a polygon. So this is kind of a basic shape layers situation. So let me just show you really quick some of the solutions around that. So we'll just have a peruse at Evan's screen real quick here. So if you want to turn a triangle into a circle, there are ways. There's so many ways. And, we can go through here. We've got this thing spins. We've got this one packs itself up like a bubble. This one does it all at once. This one expands kind of grossly. This one also blobulous. This one's three-dimensional. This one's also doing blobulous things. There are so many ways we can do this from a methodological perspective, and there are many ways that we can do this from a technical perspective as well. But the main thing is that if you're going to go from a thing, no matter what it is, to another thing, you gotta kind of think outside the box just a little bit. So we're gonna just have a jump into the old After Effects here and take you through some of them. If, dear people in the chat, there's any that really stand out that you want to go deeper on, do let us know, because we can make that happen. So yeah, and so I'm gonna start with this blob thing here. So this first one, the blob method, where one kind of just passes through the other, and we get this blobulous shape going on here. All that is happening in this shape is that we have an ellipse and we have a polystar, and they're both on the same, inside the same shape layer here. The size of one is changing, the radius of the other is changing, and where they intersect each other, we get this blobulousness, because I'm using a pretty classic offset path method where we push the paths out, and then we shrink the paths back down. In this case, we're offsetting by 300 out and then 300 back in. So if we remove those two offset things, and we just put on this one, you see it's just bulging out, and then it bulges back in. Neat. But that doesn't do much here in the corners unless you've got your merge paths on. You merge them together, it thinks it's one path, and then you're pushing out, pulling back in, you get these blobulous edges, all very nice and clean. So that's one way we can quickly go from one thing to another. One just, comes out of the other. Another thing that I want to talk about is using internal deformers. So you can deform shapes, and we get to cheat a little bit if we're going from a thing to a circle, because if you just round things out using things like the outer roundness and then the actual round corners, you can arrive at something that is a circle using that to other polygons. It's pretty simple stuff. The 3D kind of method is, again, reliant on the geometry we have to work with. How do we go from a triangle into a circle? Well, you could just cut away the edges and away it goes. So if you're thinking methodologically that way, you could say, oh, well, then I'll just delete these outside parts somehow. In this case, I'm folding them away, but you could have them slide away, fade away, all the ways, right? Just remove them. Removing stuff could get you from one thing to another. And that could be true of many types of geometry or more complex things. Maybe we remove things and then we end up somewhere. And then we get into sort of the parts that I find the most fun is actually just manipulating paths, doing it the traditional way, we might say. So in order to go from a circle into a triangle, what I considered was, you know what I need to do is have a circle that is 6 points, and then I'm going to manipulate those 6 points to go from here, push them out, suck them back in. And what you don't see is that I'm using a whole bunch of these little guides here to help me know where I might want to move those points, so that it's a little bit easier for me to figure out where these things need to move in relation to each other, and then we just only look at the result at the end. But those other layers are helping me know where I want to move points. Here's another way you might do it. And you'll notice that all of these edges and blobs are moving independently because I'm making use of an expression, or a script rather, that allows me to attach these points to a bunch of nulls. Doop, doop. So we have a heap of nulls in here, and this expression, I keep saying expression, Kyle, I'm losing my beans.
You had so few beans to begin with.
I know. The thing we have in here is I'm working with this really interesting script here. This it's basically taking the nulls from paths script and adding an extra layer to it. So we typically in After Effects here, if you want your nulls, create nulls from paths, that should be just hanging out in your window script UI stuff. But if you get the extended version, it gives you control over the Bezier handles as well. And then everything can be independent and interesting and beautiful. So that's another way to go. And then, some other messier ways. We just kind of spin this thing. And, I used a couple of circles here. This one here, where we're just having an ellipse and we're trimming it and we're creating these kind of streaks like a fan blade as it spins around. That's another way to use one geometry to get into the other type of geometry. Is there a smear? Is there a movement? Can its movement become the other thing, right? That's another way to think about it. And then finally, we got some more path points nonsense where instead of bulging the edges out, we bulge the points out. Then we get there. So here's many ways to get there. Oh, Robinson, hey, you're very, very welcome. So this is the kind of service we offer here on Motion Design Hotline. So
highly personalized.
We offer bespoke problem solving to your woes. You come to us with your woes, we solve them bespokely right here. But then Kyle, you had another way of going about it as well, which I think is infinitely valuable to also address.
And just as a reminder for those of you that might be new or haven't looked at this, later after the show, we do post a Millonov board with show notes, and we have traditionally been putting our After Effects projects in there. So you can kind of explore these in a little bit more detail and kind of see what we did. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of times where you can morph a thing into another thing, which is kind of the approach that Evan took. And you can make that happen smoothly. But there are going to be times where either you don't have time in the production timeline to really do that, or it just may not be practical with the things that you are trying to, from this A to this B may just not ever really work in a reasonable way. Or maybe you just don't have the skills to do that. Mm-hmm. So the approach that I took here, TLDR, sometimes you just kind of have to hide it.
Right.
And, that's a good general thing to think about, is a lot of times you can get pretty close to a morph, But maybe if you just throw a little bit of extra stuff on there, and ideally things that are in line with like the design of the rest of the piece, you can get away with quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the keys to being good at this kind of stuff is knowing what you can get away with.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what you got.
So I went. Let me kind of isolate what I'm doing here. So I went from triangle to square to hexagon because the question asked like triangle to circle, but also triangle to polygon.
Yeah.
And probably what I think is the trickiest one in here is actually triangle to square, because that's kind of a big change in terms of the shape here. A lot of these happen more easily. Once you start getting more sides, like that's not bad. So what I did here is I'm using the parametric shapes from a polystar or polygon here. And I just animated the points. So you can see right here, I'm animating from 3 points to 4. But look how ugly that is.
That's nasty.
It's not particularly great because After Effects has to just make a point from somewhere, right? Hey, Noel, by the way, I'm trying to say hi to people as they come in. This one's better, but it's still not amazing. Look at that kind of bloop. So, you could spend forever figuring out perfect morphs, or you can just obscure that a bit, right? And so the way I obscured it, you can see here, I animated the outer radius. So in motion, there's a little bit of a scale pop as this happens, and that kind of helps hide it. Also, this is all happening pretty fast, right? So that helps hide it too, helps kind of trick your eye. And then I started throwing some other stuff on there. Here's a little trick I like to use a lot. I just thought I'd call it out. You can have multiple fills inside of a shape layer here. So I have the pink fill, and then there's a gradient fill using a screen blending mode. So you can just put, in this case, it's just a black and white gradient, or excuse me, like a black to red gradient, and then you can use blending mode. So you can kind of get like some extra color on there. I just kind of bloomed that around the same point. Use a little bit of the echo effect to start like hiding it even more. You can kind of see here, and I kind of keyframed that so it happens more at the transition points. And then I added some other shapes that kind of burst off of here at the right moments. So it all comes together like that, and it kind of hides the jankiness. And ideally, these would be, accents that are happening in other parts of the project. I did want to kind of call out, recently School of Motion did a really nice little short tutorial. It's maybe just like a minute or two about match cuts, which is also a really great technique to know how to use, because a lot of times you can get away with a ton of stuff by just cutting similar shapes and motion together.
Well, it's interesting because when we get into more complex things, we're looking at our faces now, the most complex of shapes. You have to think about things like cutting based on the composition, right? Like the composition of the frame is similar here and here, and then it feels like one is flowing into the other. It's a technique that's used in traditional editing, right? This is a classic editing situation where the framing of one shot matches with the framing of another shot, and you feel like you've flown. You're not flying. You flow from one to the other, is the idea. But that's definitely like it's a kind of core concept, right? Because at one point we stop being one thing, and then we start being the other thing, and it's negotiating that middle tween in there. That how far do you go with one to when it goes into the other? So that's I think that's a good. I think we nailed that. I think we did it, Kyle. We did the best. Did the best off the jump. We cleared it out in like 15 minutes. So I'm just going to congratulate us on that one.
So we did. With chit chat as well.
That's true. A lot of banter on this program. And before we dive headlong, we've got some questions building up in the chat. We're putting them down, and we're going to get to those in just a moment. But first, we got to talk about our sponsor. So our sponsor, Millonov. I'm just going to go over to Evan's screen here so you can enjoy. Millonov makes these wonderful boards possible that we can put together. I use them in a lot of phases of the pre-production process. For example, actually use them to knock out a lot of scripts for things. I create scripts non-linearly. I like moving things around and playing with ideas and adding in sketches and cards. And I used to do this physically on a wall, and it used up a lot of paper. I'm trying to be more eco-conscious, so now we do it digitally. But this really allows me to push things around and to work more conceptually rather than linearly. And I find it's been very productive in thinking more abstractly about the concept of story and how it moves and flows. And, a lot of that isn't possible without virtual tools like Millonov. So if you want to give Millonov a try, use the link in the description and enjoy making that go. But also, Kyle, I'm not the only one on this program with things to plug. Kyle, what do you have to plug, and what's going on in your life?
Well, probably the biggest thing for me to plug is my upcoming appearance at the Keyframes conference, which Ian plugged last week because he'll also be there.
Right.
Keyframes is coming up November 15th through 17th in Boston, Ma. There's our Car Talk tie-in for anyone who saw my super clever tweet earlier.
Kyle, no one on here who listens to Car Talk.
There's probably nerd overlap there.
Right.
So Keyframes is going to be great. There's a bunch of really awesome speakers there. I'm excited for some of the other speakers, as well as obviously being excited to speak. And I will also be at Adobe Max. I will not be presenting, but Ian will. And I'm actually TAing for one of his labs, so that's exciting. If you haven't been Max before, it's pretty huge and pretty cool. Is this my blend segue, or should we wait a little bit for that? There's a question that goes to that.
Yeah. So let me just let's go back to FaceTime here. Yeah, because Kyle's other Kyle, questioner Kyle, is asking, longtime commenter, first time watcher, how beneficial to one's career is going to something like Blend. Because, Kyle, you were hanging out in Blend. You were in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, the best province, the best city in the best province in the best country in the world. I'm from Canada, so I can say that.
You're legally required to say that.
It's true. Tourism Canada will exile me from Canada. I'll lose my health care if I don't say it. So, yeah, what was it? Talk us a bit about what it was like, and then I guess from a career perspective, what that's all about.
Yeah. I have been to quite a few conferences, and so I'll kind of talk to that in general. I thought Blend was really great. It was a good size. Yes, you are the original Kyle. I'll give you that.
OG Kyle.
You have a cooler last name. Zager sounds kind of like, I don't know, futuristic or something. Blend was really cool. The talks there are very like, it's a lot of stuff that's kind of more high level and inspiring, and a lot of the like squishy stuff that has to do with, what we do and how to be successful at what we do. And they're from people that have worked on really high profile projects for high profile clients. So they know what they're talking about. I do have some specific notes that I can pull out from a couple of takeaways here.
Yeah. Give us those notes.
But at a base level, like, does something like this, how beneficial to one's career is going to something like Blend? I would say very. So I work by myself in my basement.
You're looking at it.
Yeah, you're looking at it right now. This is my office.
You work in a dark void
for quite a while, and I'll certainly say that I spent many years kind of just like treadmilling down here, figuratively, not literally. I should have been doing both, but it's easy to kind of get isolated in a lot of ways, like socially, but also professionally. And you may just be kind of toiling away on the same stuff all the time. Getting out and meeting other people that do what you do is really important, and I highly recommend it. Whether that's Blend or Max or Keyframes or After Effects World or other design conferences or local meetups or just having lunch with people or whatever, like, go do that, and it will be beneficial to you. You're not going to get immediate tangible returns from every meeting you have, but I mean, I'll tell you, like, I got a referral from somebody that I met at Max like 2 years ago, and keep up with. And I've gotten many tens of thousands of dollars from that client this year, for stuff that I find relatively easy. And like, that's something that wouldn't have happened if I just don't go to things. Like, go to things, be a good person, be cool to talk to, and it will give you like huge benefits in.
Yeah, and I'll say,
Socially,
like,
professionally.
even if you can't get out to all of the blends and all of the NABs and all of the keyframes in the world, being out and being a part of your local community is also very important. So if there are meetups, not only motion design, but regular design meetups, animation meetups, get out to these things, interface with people that, you know, like you say, do the same things, have the same struggles. This very show, I think, was born out of the two of us meeting in Vegas,
Yep,
right? Like,
absolutely.
this would not have happened if we didn't have that FaceTime to kick around several ideas of varying quality, some of which are becoming reality. But those kinds of really inspirational back and forth interactions that you don't really have when you're just, here's a tweet, here's another tweet, here's a Slack message, here's another Slack message. You know, going deep and filling in the details and just having that low pressure hang, you know, with people with common cause is, I think, important. So anyway, but
You'll definitely find people with whom you are like really compatible. You'll just hit it off with certain people, and you know, some of them might become your really good friends, even though they live across the country or across the world.
Yeah.
They might be people that you know, work with a lot and do amazing things with.
Yeah, and it really, because it's very easy to become some sort of, I would say, you can sometimes get like cynical or pessimistic if you're in a bubble. If things aren't going well, it kind of just snowballs. But when you get outside of that, then things start to become more positive and things pick up speed. It's really important to do those things. So, but I want to know what's on your notepad. What kind of notes did you make at Blend?
So I have a few Blend notes. I kind of just try to give like the real Cliff Notes version. And a couple of friends had posted their notes. I think only one of them is public, but I'm gonna plug JC's notes that are up on his site, so you can kind of get those for yourself. But here are just a couple of what I felt were kind of like the key takeaways. And I know there are a couple of fellow attendees here in the and Jake just showed up here in the chat. So
Jake,
if I miss something big, feel free to throw them at me. But there were a couple people that kind of reinforced something along the lines of, you know more than you think you know, which I have gotten that a couple times too. Just like, obviously don't be arrogant or cocky, but like be confident in your skills. A lot of us creatives can get real in our head and even like be prejudging your ideas before you even present them, because you're already imagining what the people are going to think about them and stuff. Like, obviously it's easier said than done, but just try to be confident in your ideas. And, you know, remember that your ideas are not you too, especially when you are like a one person business or something like this. It's easy to get stuck in that. But as much as possible, try to detach yourself from that. The guys from Gunner gave a really good talk about putting together the right team. They kind of talked about the people that work with them at their studio and how they've gotten really great stuff by all the different combinations of those people. And Hondo Eugene had a lot of really good stuff to say. I think some of the main points of that are like, think about or redefine what success means to you. And this is another thing I've heard a lot of people say. I try to kind of convey this too. Like, is success like killing yourself to work on super cool, high profile stuff and work like 20 hours a day if that's what it takes? Maybe, if that's cool to you. Maybe success to you is working 10 hours a week and like having a bunch of time to surf. You know, it's whatever's important to you. Figure out what that is, and then you can kind of figure out what you need to do to achieve that, right?
I like that second one.
Yeah. And then a really good takeaway from his stuff is that the process is the product, and the process is the reward. He had a good quote that fortunately someone else wrote down because I didn't. Every job that you coast through, parentheses, when you don't you just kind of phone it in, you do a thing without challenging yourself, you rob yourself of the opportunity to become a better artist. That was a good one. There was a lot of really cool stuff. The guy that was the lead character, the person in charge of I forget his exact title. Joshua Beveridge, though, he works at Sony for Spider-Verse, and he showed a lot of the way they got to the decisions about things like animating the camera on ones and animating characters on twos, but then frame locking the characters so that they didn't slide, as a really interesting presentation, and showed some work in progress stuff of how they figured out how to show how much Miles is in his own head through just facial expressions and eye movements and stuff. It was really fascinating. But a lot of it was secret stuff that I don't think they can show publicly. So you'll just have to take my word for it.
Secrets.
Oh, and one last good thing.
Okay.
This is from one of the quick tips, and I'm sorry off the top of my head I forgot who said this, but one of you in the chat may know. That if someone asks you a thing and you don't have an answer right away, don't be afraid to just say, "Let me think on that, and I'll get right back to you."
Yeah, it is far better to admit you don't have the answer right now than to give answers that are not great, or could be detrimental, or could just be plain old wrong. I think this is a really interesting thing that happens in a lot of social functions. If you're out at a party, if you're networking, no one wants to appear kind of foolish or without information. I forget which comedian it is, and I think maybe Tim Riel, I know you're in the chat, you probably know. I think it might have been John Cleese that said this, that rather than saying you know something when you don't, admit you don't know it, and the other person will be so happy to tell you more about it, right? Oh, do you know such and such band? Never heard of them. What's good about them, right? That's a way more productive thing.
Oh, yeah, they're great.
Yeah, they're great. Oh, yeah, what's your favorite song? Oh, no, you caught me. They're all good. I like their earlier work. Oh, really? Because their earlier work was just a CD of silence. So what an interesting thing to say.
Yeah, it was really super bold choice.
Right. But just admitting you don't have knowledge, I think, is the first step, But yeah, that's
scary.
I'm super jealous. I did not get to go to Blend. Someday I'll be able to justify the plane ride from Ottawa to Vancouver. Someday. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But hey, it's time to get into questions. It's question time. We are getting into the realness here. Is there anyone that kind of jumps out? Which one is kind of high on your mind? I think we should jump into something technical because it's been a lot of us faces.
I see Nuno's here down at the bottom is actually one that I can probably answer pretty quickly.
Right. Okay, because I was just, while you were talking, instead of listening to you like a good host, I was opening After Effects. Because I think the problem he's mentioning, and I'll just kind of demonstrate it real quick on my screen, while I open up the switcher and switch to my screen. The trubs that he seems to be indicating is on a regular layer, when you transform the position, you get this motion path, right? And you can see it. You can see this motion path, and you know what it is, and you know where it is, and you can manipulate it with a path tool, right? If we were instead to manipulate in here, say contents ellipse 1 ellipse path, and then this position, no path. There's no path for us to observe, right? Why no path, right? And then if we go into the keyframe interpolation of this, you go keyframe interpolation, then you can see the spatial interpolation in here. We're changing it to linear, we're changing it to Bezier, but again, we don't get to see and manipulate that. Now, certainly we can manipulate it in the old grapho editor here, if we so desired. We could observe the value graph, and we can edit it up and smooth it out how we like in here, but that's not super intuitive. I think if I'm figuring the problem correctly, this is where we're at. But yeah, Kyle, what do you think is there a solution to reveal these paths? I don't know if there really is.
Well, there's not a way to reveal them.
Right.
And let me see. Give me just a second before you pull me, if you didn't already. I was trying to find the link to this tool.
Yeah, because
I have a good solution.
a few ways like jump into my mind, right? One is that you could just draw a path and then link one to the other. But that doesn't really solve the problem of being able to see and manipulate it, right? It's almost like you need extra data coming in if you really want to get this sub-layer information that's going on. Is the trubs.
Codes. Here we go. There we go. I wanted to be able to provide the link before I plug this thing. Okay. So you are correct that there really is no way to get this internal motion stuff.
Right.
Shape layers can get a little confusing because you have, like in this case here, I've got shape layer 1, and this has its own transform properties. We'll just focus on position here, right? So right now, I'm moving the entire layer, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm with you so far.
Yep. And then within the contents here, I have a rectangle path and this pink square, which is really just a group called pink square, has its own transform properties. So this group can be moved. Whoa, there's another square there. How about that?
What's this square?
And you can also have multiple paths within a group, and those can have their own positions. So if you can see here, there's 2 pink square paths here, and then this this group has its own transform properties. So that can all get a little much, right?
There's so many positions.
There are. And there are certainly reasons why you need that kind of complexity.
Yeah. And C. Merritt is saying they just use nulls, right? Because you could just link up these positions, 2 positions of nulls that you can see, and then you've got a bunch of nulls out there, right? You're sort of pushing the data off into other layers, which is a great tip. I think
absolutely.
I am pro null over here.
However, there's a hitch to that, and I'm not going to code this live because I'm going to give you an easier solution to it. The reason I wanted to point all this out is if you look at this position right here for this pink square group, this position is 0, 0, right?
Yeah.
But the center of this composition is actually 400, 400. And so this null that I created, which is at the exact same place, is 400, 400. Mm-hmm. So you can't just link this to this because now 400, 400 is down here.
Yeah, relative to its internal coordinate system.
What you need, and like I said, I'm not going to code this live because I will mess it up just doing it off the cuff, but you need an expression function called toComp to make this work, okay? And I'll see if I can give you a better explanation for that in a minute. But if you want to do this an easier way, there is actually, I'm sure there are a couple tools that can do something like this, but there's a very handy one called ShapeOut. It's a little script panel right here, and you can find it on this Gumroad right here, Mysteropods. We'll post this link. I'll post it in the chat here, and you can also, we'll post it in the show notes. He's got a couple of tools. One of them is called ShapeOut. He recently released a more robust version, which I just haven't installed yet. And it gives you a lot of control over internal shape layer stuff. So check this out. I'll just select my pink square here and hit extract null. I believe, is that what I want? Yeah, I think. I thought that's what I wanted. We'll do it live.
That's right. You're seeing all the stuff.
All the stuff. Maybe I just do it for the whole layer. There we go, for the whole layer. So now what I have is 2 nulls that are linked via expressions, and I'll hit EE to reveal all these. You can see it revealed. It just tied all the position properties here, or all the transform properties to this, but it's doing them relative to the comp. So you can use these nulls to drive this, all this stuff in here. And I could keyframe these, which I'll do just very quickly here. And look at that, motion paths. Yes, yes, yes. And then let's say I'm really happy with all this beautiful work that I've done here, because who wouldn't be? Whoa, right? You can bake these back in. Let me see. I forget if I just need that. I may need to select all of them here. Bake null. Yep, you can bake it right back in. Whoop, and it kept all that. You still can't see the motion path, but you can affect the handles and stuff like that and do exactly what you need, and then bake it back down so you can get rid of extra layer.
Sweet. And while you've got your interface open there,
Yeah.
we got Ray Cook is asking, what is that auto-easing plugin? I think they're asking about that flow you've got.
Flow over here, yes, which I didn't even use, but I could have. So this over here is Flow, and it is by Render Tom and Zach Lovett, and I can post that link in a minute too. And basically what this does is it lets you it's not exactly a replacement for the After Effects graph editor, but it's an enhancement for it. So you can edit your curves here and apply them either to the keyframes or as expressions if you want, which there are reasons for that. And then it's also a preset holder. So it comes with several, and then you can also create your own and download them from several other people as well.
Yeah, it's a library of, like, if there's a certain type of motion you use all the time or certain presets and you don't want to go into the graph editor every time and you're dealing with 100 layers, 1,000 layers, I don't know, and they don't need to be bespoke and unique every time, put them in there. If Flow can save you, if it shaves 5 minutes off every layer as you tweak and whatever, and yeah, it's very, very helpful.
And crucially, if you work somewhere you have motion guidelines that you have to adhere to, or you're working in someone else's project or replicating that, you can take some existing keyframes and you can extract those curves from that and then apply those to some other property. So it makes it really easy to fit everything together like that. And I think that actually kind of answers Tori's earlier question as well. I hate to just say, buy this thing as the solution to a problem, but this is one good solution to that problem.
Right.
There are a few other tools that can do similar stuff as well. But
it's interesting because, and Tori, I'd love to go to Tori's question next, I think, just because she's asking about keyframe velocity. Actually, I don't know if Tori is a gendered name. Let's just say they. Let's say Tori.
Tori is a woman. I know her.
Okay. So Tori, when we're talking about keyframe velocity, right, we go, well, let's go to Evan's screen, I guess. And keyframe velocity, we're talking about position has velocity. A lot of things has velocity. When we crack open our graphs editors, and we double click on this point, we get our keyframe velocity information. And she's asking about, I think, between two layers, right? What is the velocity and how do we make the two of them match each other? I wish there was an easier method, but for me, since I usually have this view open all the time, I don't really notice it too much. What you would really want to do when you have two separate layers is just make sure that you are sort of clicking on them both and bring them both into the graph editor at the same time. So you don't have to tab between them, and then you'll be able to see their velocity pixels per second, line them up. Because when you want to get things smooth, or this has to come and meet with this, or those kinds of things, that's really what the graph editor is for. The graph editor is certainly not perfect, I will say, but just checking your kind of view settings down here. So show selected, show animated, show graph editor set. You can really fill this up with so many things that you like in here to get all of the things in here at once. And it can become hectic and unmanageable, but I think the big way that I usually do it is just making sure that I've got all the properties that I want to mess with and then mushing them into each other so that they align. This does get very complicated when you're dealing with things like paths. So if you've got a path transforming and a position transforming, you can render the velocity of position in terms of pixels per second, but paths, as they change over time, don't necessarily have that same expression of velocity, right? Or scale, right? Scale is not expressed in the same units, so it can be difficult to kind of convert between them. you kind of have to do it a little bit visually as well. Is where we get stuck sometimes. Those are the nitty and or gritty parts that I wish. If someone else has a solution, please tell me, because I'd be interested. There probably are scripts though that are just like match velocity, blurp, and it would do that, right?
I am blanking. Key. I know one of you in the chat will know this. Key Cloner. Is that what Paul's is?
Oh, I think so. I think it's Key Cloner. Yeah.
Yes, by Paul Conigliaro, who goes by Konigs. This is another great plugin here, which you can find here for matching keyframes or just working with them more easily in general. So this one's definitely worth checking out as well.
And while we're on the hunt for various expression plugins and scripts, Theo is asking if there's a way to automate the creation of markers, to match the BPM of music. I feel like there is one that does exactly that.
Absolutely, it's called Beat Edit.
Yeah, I feel like it might be the title.
Matthias made that. Yeah, Matthias Mole, who is Mammo World, who is some kind of crazy genius. He is an actual doctor, I think, in computer science. Beat Edit will listen to music and find the beats, and markers is one of the outputs that you can create from that, I believe.
That's a pretty wacky thing to do. Mm-hmm. There's various other kind of sound reacting things. You get your sound keys. You get your there's one called Freak React, which is a very interesting thing that I really enjoy. And then we've got I know that Continuum has one in. I think it's called Beat something. So everything is either a beat or a sound something.
Also, just to point this out, let me see real quick if I have an audio file handy. I think here, I want to make sure that I grab something that isn't like
copyrighted.
Yeah. I'm not even going to listen to it. I just want to
you just need the data.
I just need something. Yeah. Okay. Well, here, this is like a stock music track. Okay. Just to point this out, in case you're not aware, while there are quite a few plugins that can work with audio information and do stuff like that, and just to show you here, this is my waveform, which you can get by pressing LL on a layer with audio. There's my waveform. You can right-click on any layer with audio, Keyframe Assistant, and convert audio to keyframes. So that's just going to be the base levels of this here, the amplitude, and it'll split out the tracks. It'll give you left channel, right channel, and then combined. And so you can then do something with these keyframes if you want. You could have these drive, shape layers or something like that. It's obviously not the beat of the music, but you could use the amplitude to be driving something if you want.
And one of the kind of frustrating things is that BPM doesn't necessarily line up with frames, right?
Right.
Those two concepts of measuring time don't always line up. So you would probably want something that also has the capacity to do sub-frame timing, which I feel like, if the man's a doctor of computer science, that's probably in there. We got like 15 minutes, but we might run long. We got a few more questions. If you've got more questions for us, please get them in the chat. We've got a couple more that are sitting in the queue that we're going to get to. So I'm going to jump back into our two-shot here as we deliberate some thoughts. First one here, we got one from Dutch Dragonzer. We're going to talk about some fake 3D tutorials. We do have a bunch of those on the EC Abrams channel. Most recently, one where I talk about cylinder, like making a circle into a cylinder just by having shape layers take up that space. And that's part of. I'd like to talk more about it. It's hard to have a lot more to say about faking 3D stuff. It is all about parallax shifting. It is all about the subtle interplay between planes to make them seem like one thing or the other. More recently, and I'm sure I've shot myself in the foot with this by cracking open Cinema 4D more and doing things more really in 3D. And that's been fun. I really enjoy faking things in 2D because all you're doing is making something look like it has depth. So the idea of, what do you need to do to make this compellingly seem like it has depth? And you can be very abstract about it. That's one of the reasons I love 2D things, is that it doesn't have to be real. We don't need real perspective. We just need to show some kind of depth. And that may mean shadows. That may mean something you do by just showing what the side of a thing looks like, or how 2 points move in relation to 2 other points, and that tells you they're moving close or far. Abstract things are, in my opinion, way more fun than real things, because I live in reality and I find it very constraining all day long. So that's why I kind of prefer fake 3D stuff. But have a look around. I'm not the only one who talks about these concepts as well. I know there are plenty of other good things out there. But if I can promote people to look beyond the live stuff on this channel, guys, we do more than live things on this channel. It's crazy. But hopefully that kind of explains a little bit. More are forthcoming in the future. Trying to free up more time, get away from some client things, to be able to kind of elucidate more on those subjects, but definitely more coming up in the future.
I think maybe a real quick point on that is understand what you're working with. So After Effects in general, which is what we're in, is not a 3D program. It is a program that allows you to put things in 3D space. Yeah. Okay. But and this is the way they like to, I've heard Adobe people describe it. It's postcards in space. Okay. This is what After Effects does.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of plugins, both native and not, that allow you to fudge it in a variety of ways. But as you've probably learned, if you work with those and try to do complex stuff with them, you'll hit limitations sometimes because it is not a 3D software. There are times if you need that, go over to Cinema or your other 3D program of choice. But you can do a tremendous amount of fakery in here. Especially those of us that have been doing it for a long time probably know all kinds of crazy techniques for it out of necessity.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when you have to fake depth and then you have a certain art style you have to do it in, that's the puzzle that I really enjoy working with. It's got to be mono width lines. Have fun with this, buddy. Because how you show depth is usually the thickness of a thing or the as the perspective changes. So it's well, now we can't do that. We got a different way to do it. So leaning on those things is a lot of stuff. I'm seeing Mikey Borup in the chat. What's up? It's it's, oh yeah.
And yes, as Mikey pointed out, shatter is actually a really great, it's super old school. It's a really great way to extrude things right here in After Effects. You can extrude certain things already, vector shapes and text.
And you do have access to Cinema 4D Lite. So if you want to play around, get in there. But I think the next one in our queue here is this is from Nick Abrams, the other Abrams. And they're asking, the client has approved style frames. How often do you have to create new design elements on the fly as you're animating? Or do you have everything planned from the style frames? So for me personally, style frames in my kind of pitching process are really only showing select moments in a piece in their fullest, in their kind of fullest look. Right, we're really just trying to sell people on the look that we're going to go through. Some of the assets are done. If we have to do storyboards that are very similar to, I would say, if we're going to make storyboards that are exactly how it's going to look, then we've got the assets made in the boards, right? But typically, I want the boards to be something that are more rough, more sketched, more quick and gestural, so that we can bang out a bunch of boards. When you look at the style frames and you look at the storyboards, you should be able to combine them in your mind and understand where we're going. A lot of people do need finished boards. It happens. Not everyone has a dense imagination, I guess. But it really, because it's a communication tool, right? So sometimes it has to be the fuller version of the thing. But no, often I have to create new elements as things are going. to make up what we call the tweens, right? In traditional animation, we would call these the tweens, or some cover-ups that need to either smear, or, between A and B is object C, who knows? And that's all part of, I would hope, when you're doing your storyboards, you're also thinking methodologically, how am I even getting from this to that, right? And then you create what makes up the middle is the idea. It's figuring out, all right, well, we're going to go from this hot dog, and it's going to turn into this regular looking dog. How do we get between these two boards, right? You would have to create quite an amount of objects, shapes, things in between one and the other to make that grotesque journey happen. If you're working more in static things, I could see that methodology leading to having everything prepared, right? But definitely not. I would rarely plan to never make anything. That's sort of part of the joy, right? Hey, here's some boards, and sometimes I'm not even making the boards.
Yeah,
I'll be honest. Kyle, how about you? Because you do a fair amount of this stuff as well.
yeah. I mean, I'd say it's probably pretty rare that you don't have to create or recreate something. Obviously, if someone else is creating your boards for you, their level of animation knowledge may be different from yours. And ideally you work with someone that at least builds things in a way that can be animated easily. That's not always the case, but, it depends a lot on the project. And I think it depends a lot on who you're working with too, because sometimes it might be really beneficial to have a designer worry about the look of the project and not even really think too terribly much about how you're going to get there. And then rely on the animator to figure all that stuff out. Of course, I think best case, your animator is either the same person or is at least involved there, so you can have conversations about, well, if we have to go from this water bottle to this phone, like what are we going to do to make that happen, and why are we going to make those choices?
Oh, Kyle, I've already nailed it. The cap is black. The phone is black. We're just going to have the rest of the bottle go away. Boom. Yeah. And then the cap turns into the side of the phone, and it rotates around, and there we are. This is Evan and Kyle solve it live. How do you get from one object to another? That could be a good bit. I'm going to write that down for bits later that we can do in future shows.
Yeah, we're mostly just saving up dumb jokes and bits that we can do at some point.
Yeah,
that's really more important to us.
This show is a gaslighting effort for us to get more bits into our show. But yeah, this is some interesting stuff. And Kyle, because we're able to share notes with each other, we're seeing in the chat. We were talking about that beat plugin. And it has been scooped that thing costs $149 American dollars. What do you? So, and your subscription to After Effects and Creative Cloud already costs a lot of money. What's up with that?
Yeah. So I don't want to be calling Theo out. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the intent of the comment, but I think I thought it was something that I would speak to for a minute. So, these apps like After Effects, in a lot of ways, is almost a platform rather than just an app on itself. And there's a lot of times where, oh, yes, I forgot. Like, I'm wearing Mikey's shirt and he's here. So, yay.
Mikey, give the people the link where they can get the shirt.
Yeah. We'll put that in the show notes, too. But, Mikey, if you can link that.
Yeah.
After Effects in particular is a big program that can do a lot of stuff, right? And this is something like a conversation that I see people throwing at the Adobe team a lot. Like, well, why can't you just put this in here? Why can't you just put this in here? And if you think about all the different ways people use this software, if the Adobe team, which is not that big for After Effects, spent all of their time trying to accommodate every little specific request that people had for their specific workflow, they would literally never make anything.
Yeah.
And they already get enough complaints about, all their work as it is.
Right. Stability complaints. We're talking about like, why does the thing break? why do we have those, right? And for those who are just joining us, this beat plugin, it's essentially it's putting markers or other things. It's analyzing audio and then doing things with it based on the sounds that it's hearing, which is a radical methodology, I'll say. Right? There are other plugins that do it using different methodologies. This one is totally like they're all over here and it's way up here, right?
Yeah. It's quite magical.
Yeah, it takes significant development time. It takes a lot of testing and support because every time After Effects updates, that thing still has to work. If you're putting $150 in it, it better work when I update After Effects. You just gotta say. And it's the other thing. So I live a very vanilla life, Kyle. I think anyone who knows me knows that. I don't have a lot of plugins on my system.
Side note, vanilla is actually a good flavor, and it gets a bad rap.
We're not gonna.
That's for a future episode.
Not the platform for this this debate. I'll get into why Evan hates the flavor of vanilla later, but that's a different podcast. When it comes to though getting plugins, because early in my career I was so broke that. The idea of like, oh, this job requires Plexus. I can't afford that. But if, let's say, putting markers on music is something that you are going to do for an entire year, you're at a record label, you're dealing with a lot of artists, this is something that's going to be integral to your workflow. It's going to save you 10 hours every week, let's say. 10 billable hours every week.
Yeah. Start doing some math on that.
Yeah, it starts to really add up in terms of these plugins, these extensions that are, in order for me to buy one of them, I'll just say it has to have either true workflow utility in terms of real man hours, real person hours, real people hours that it's dealing with, real work hours, right? Look, my real Red Dead Redemption hours, not billable, but the real time sitting in front of After Effects time, if it can significantly reduce that, value. If it can do something that I couldn't do earlier that was impossible to do, also high value. There's kind of a break-even point as to, I know a lot about expressions, so I can solve a lot of my problems that way. But for other people, that would be so annoying to do, right? So in that way, the plugin is valuable, has the value. But yeah. And you know what? Now we got a follow-up question.
Yeah, I see that.
Tim saying, you do like say to get plugins to fix a problem, but what plugins should I get for what I feel are common problems? Some common probs. So this is interesting. I'm glad, Kyle, that you mentioned that everyone uses After Effects for different things, right? Compositors are using After Effects. Motion designers are using After Effects. People making GIFs are using After Effects. There's so many people who come to After Effects from different areas, right? And so their set of problems really depends on what in their day they're actually touching, right? So the big thing is that you want to identify what are the pain points, what hurts me, show me where After Effects hurt you, right? And then we can start to identify what those are. A lot of people have trouble with keyframes and smoothing of things, right? So the idea that that are like, oh, why isn't this animation smooth, right? Or why can't I recreate this? Then, in which case, flow is very valuable for that, because the graph editor is intimidating for people that don't want to do it. Then definitely flow is for you, right? But on the other hand, if it's things like I need to be able to do 3D things, like my most common problem, Cineware is not working the way I want. Well, hey, here's some way to bring .obj files in, right? Then we're talking about trap code suites. We're talking about other things that are going to make use of .objs to make these things. So what is common, and it's an interesting question, because what is common to one is not common to all.
Absolutely.
There are certainly like user interface things. There are rendering shrubs that a lot of people have. Like, number one rendering based problem, why doesn't H.264 work good? Like, why doesn't GIF export work good? But if I never export a GIF in my life, then not a problem for Evan.
Right.
I'll be telling you this. We should get way more into making bespoke GIFs to promote this stream. But yeah, I'm also seeing, we're coming in towards the end of the program, but I'm seeing a lot more questions, Kyle. Do you want to just hang out and do some of these?
I mean, Or should we make a habit of ending on time? I don't know.
Look, Ian set a dangerous precedent last episode that we
true.
would hang out for an extra 20 minutes.
But, you know, if we're on people's lunch break, like, they're going to bail on us.
I know, man. I don't want people
Then we'll cry.
I would be sad, you know. Yeah. Well, you
know. Let's is there one more that we can answer with a quick I mean, that I don't know, that kind of felt like a good like wrap up answer too, but if there's something else that you see,
you know, it did feel definitive. I saw there Patrick had some questions about pricing, which might have been a thing. You know, we end every show yakking about biz on here.
You know what? Okay, that's good. So Patrick pointed out maybe this is just kind of a good wrap up on this. He said, I often have to pick up new plugins for specific problems in projects. It's usually well worth the price. It's a pretty small line item usually, but it's something to consider in your pricing rate. When possible, if you figure out that you're going to need to buy something, particularly something fairly expensive, to do a certain project, build that into your rate for the project. Obviously, that's not always appropriate to do, but you know, and if it's something that you are buying to use every day for the next 10 years, maybe that's less appropriate. If you're buying it to be able to do this one project and you may never touch it again, that's kind of on the client, right?
A little bit. It's sort of like, do you charge for stock imagery, right? Mm-hmm. Do you charge for stock footage? Well, in a way, if this is a generator that only generates the one thing, then it kind of is, right? There are some plugins that I'm like, that's a generator, you know.
But if it saves you half a day building it from scratch, that's probably worth $25 or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, like I always go back to the Plexus thing because Plexus was one of the ones that I was so on the fence about. But there was no other way to do it. There was no other way to have this at the time. At the time, Stardust didn't exist. You have to remember that Evan and Kyle are speaking to you from the past. And so when I say there didn't used to be shape layers, so that'll blow your mind.
Back in the days of motion design.
In my day, I didn't have any trap codes. I barely had any base codes. No. So it's... for my trap and bass codes, that these things, if they only do one thing, like you were saying, what's the value there? You know, that if you can't find a way to shoehorn into more things, I don't know. It is definitely, it's a hard call, and it's a subjective call. It's subjective for everybody. It's the same question, do I need an eGPU or a render farm? I don't know, do you? Like, only you know, because you have to make the hard choice, the business choice, right? Because it stops being about, do I want this shiny object, and does my business can it reasonably juice enough value out of this asset that we are about to acquire? So I guess on that kind of biz talk, that's maybe where we'll end it. You know, it has been an asset, a boon, hanging out with you, Kyle. I always love investing the time hanging out here on Motion Design Hotline with you. For everybody out there, thank you all for joining us in the chat. We're going to be back next week with more of this. Same motion time, same motion channel. If you enjoy this kind of thing, please subscribe, turn on notifications so that you know when it's happening. And, you know, follow us on the social medias. I'm at EC Abrams on Twitter. Kyle, where can people find things about you?
I am KyleHamrick.com, or you can find me at Kylosaurus Rex on the Twitters.
Where can people see you live? Because that's coming up.
Keyframes Conference, November 15th through 17th.
Coming to Boston. In Boston, meh.
I'm getting an announcer. It's definitely time to cut me off.
That's right. So thank you again so much for coming out. It's always a pleasure to see people in the chat. And, you know, it's even better to see you all in real life, but it's great to see you on here. So thanks again. And, you know, if you subscribe and you follow us on these things, then we will see you around the internet. Thanks again, and have a great day. And now I go da-doot, da-doot.